What if you had a tool that could improve your heart health and as a result increase your longevity? And the best part of it all is that the fact that it's not fancy and you can do it on your own. Well, that tool is VO2 Max, and today I'm going to be giving you a simplified version, at least my version, of what it is, how it affects your health, and ways you can increase it. Welcome back to Peak Performance Hacks, and I'm your host, Dr. Gan, where we keep you sharp, stay focused, and performing at your peak. I stumbled onto VO2 Max a long time ago, but I never really gave it a lot of energy for the simple reason that I just felt that the healthier you were, if you were exercising and doing all the basics, for example, at a beep test, when you go for a run, cycle, a weight session, or even sport that you play, well, naturally you'll be healthier anyways. But with the current studies, it essentially shows that if you increased your VO2 max, you can lower the chances of overall mortality by over 50% over a 10-year period. The higher you go with your VO2 max, the lesser the chance that you are going to die. Now, that is a very important indicator. But what is your VO2 max? It is the maximum volume of oxygen delivered to your muscles per kilogram of body weight per minute. Now, this seems complicated, but the higher this number essentially means that your muscles are getting more oxygen to them, and therefore you'll be performing at a better or higher level in that activity that you're doing. Our bodies need oxygen to function at their best. We know this. The way they get this is when we breathe through our nose, then air going into our lungs, and then eventually our heart then pumping it through the body. The oxygen is transported through our red blood cells to all our cells, including your muscles. Our muscles need oxygen to create energy in the form of ATP, which is adenosine triphosphate. And the faster that we get that oxygen into the cells, the faster and more efficient our bodies can utilize that and work in any activity that we're performing. Essentially, your VO2 max measures your peak cardiorespiratory fitness, but then there are many variables, as in any indicator. I've simplified it here. So for example, if you were a man or male, you would have a higher VO2 max versus a woman. And if you were younger, you would have a higher VO2 max versus someone that was much older. So how do you actually measure it? The most accurate form of measuring your VO2 max would be going to a dedicated testing center where they hook you up on a treadmill or even on a bike, and they give you an accurate indicator of what your VO2 max is. Now, I've never done that, and personally, I've just felt I didn't need to, and I just use my Garmin watch, which gives me a basic indicator of where my baseline is. Now, I've heard that people using Apple Watches have found that they're not as accurate when it comes to your VO2 max, but if you need a baseline, I think that's pretty good, especially if you're not a professional athlete. If you're a busy professional, why does your VO2 max even matter? Now, as I've mentioned, it reduces your risk of dying by over 50% depending on where your baseline is. This is on top of the fact that if you already had other risk factors such as family history of heart disease, or you were even a smoker. Now, I'm not saying this to give you a pass to continue smoking, but this is what the research shows. So even if you had heart disease, diabetes, hypertension, or were a smoker, VO2 max was a better predictor of all-cause mortality. The key point that I want to stress is that you do not have to be a top athlete to make a difference in your life when it comes to VO2 max. You just can't be at the bottom level of that indicator when you look at it between 0 to 100. So for example, if you find yourself for your sex and age that you're between the 25th to the 50th percentile, you're in a much better position than someone in between 0 and 25 or just at the bottom when it comes to your risk of dying. Again, if you remove other factors like smoking and a poor diet, then the risk reduces even further. The first thing I would implore you to do if you're interested in VO2 max is to first find out where you sit when it comes to that chart based on your sex and age, and that will give you a great indicator. If you find yourself between the 0 and 25th, you need to stop what you're doing and you need to do something immediately, whether it's to join a gym, get a trainer, or even get a health program to change your life. So now that I've got your attention, what is the best way to increase your VO2 max? You found that you're actually not at the bottom, you're maybe at the 25th percentile and you want to get better. What can you do to increase this? The first thing I would start off with is having a consistent workout or training program. And this may seem pretty obvious, but for a lot of people that are busy, things get in the way and all of a sudden their training or workouts are are getting blown out and they're actually missing them. What you want to do when you have that consistent training program is that you want to keep your heart rate anywhere between the 60 to 80% range of your max heart rate for your age and sex. To calculate this quickly, to find out what your max heart rate is you take the number 220 and you subtract your age, and that will give you your max heart rate. So for example, if you were 50, that would be 170, that would be your max heart rate. So 60 to 80% of that would be anywhere around 102 to 137 or so, between the 60 to 80%. And this is just a rough guide, but it allows you to know what your max heart rate is and where the VO2 training zone is. Now, the first time I saw this, I was actually blown away because I just felt that that heart rate of 102 to 137, and for myself, I think it was a little bit higher, was quite low. And the first thing that I thought was that if I was training at that level, potentially that's probably not going to make me push harder or even get better when it comes to my performance. But the reality is that if you did do this and you did it consistently for a period anywhere between 30 to 45 minutes, breaking it into 4 to 5 times a week, or even 3 to 4 times of workouts a week, this would make a huge difference. Now, you could do anything from running, cycling, rowing, or even swimming, and you could supplement this with some strength training to increase your muscle efficiency as well. Your training time has to be around 30 to 45 minutes, potentially, as I said, 3 to 4 times a week. Now, once a week, you should push yourself even more than that, because you'll notice that your heart rate's going to be in that 60 to 80% range, and you can push yourself and you can go up to the 90% and even higher range once a week. And one way to do this is what has become quite popular right now, is the 3x3 or the 4x4, whereby you work really hard for 4 minutes and then you rest for 4 minutes. So in that 4 minutes, you should hit your peak, whereby at the end of that 4 minutes, you're not able to do the activity anymore and you almost want to collapse because that's how exhausted you are. Then you rest and you repeat this 3 or 4 times. Now, the hardest thing I found when doing this initially was the fact that when you start doing this workout, when you're trying to push hard for the 4 minutes or 3 minutes, you'll find that by the time you hit the 3rd minute or 4th minute, you're about to collapse because you just can't do it. So finding your baseline or where your threshold is a great way to start when you initially start doing this, because you don't want to max yourself out whereby you can only do one set of 4 minutes and then resting, because you essentially need to do this at least another 3 or 4 times afterwards. Now, you can change the variation of how you want to do it, whether you have a minute on, minute off, or 2 minutes on or 2 minutes off, and this will still get you a great result. And what you will find is that the first set that you do for the first 4 minutes or the first 2 minutes, whichever you decide to choose, you'll find that the next time you try to do it, you might not be able to do it in 2 minutes. It might take you a little bit longer to do the same amount of activities. Now, the other thing I found was that 30 to 45 minutes a week of exercise was just a lot of time. At least it was for me. And as a result, I started doing high intensity interval training for years, and you can get the same effect by doing a 20 minutes workout or even less and get the same VO2 max increases in your health. But the challenge I found was that it was starting to drain me. As I got a bit older, I found it started to drain me, especially when I had those big working days and I had a lot of other stresses in my life. My heart rate variability was really taking a hit. And as a result, I started swapping high intensity interval training for other activities. And now I sort of have a hybrid whereby I do a mixture through the week of high intensity interval training, rowing, sprints, weights. And for now, this is my sweet spot whereby I can change it up, but potentially this could change in the future. And the best part of it all is that you just have to try to work out what makes sense for you or what makes you feel good. And you just have to work out what works for you. I believe you may feel the same way, and one size does not always fit everyone. As with all these episodes that I've done, VO2 Max is not the magic bullet. It is a great indicator and it has amazing research behind it. to make a difference when it comes to your health and longevity. But being stressed out of your head, eating poorly, and even having reduced sleep, these are all factors that are equally important. And I believe most people should be starting at this level before they even consider VO2 max. So, really keeping with the basics, getting yourself to a point whereby you feel that you're sleeping well, you're managing your stress, you're eating well, you're hydrating well. These are the factors that make a big difference. And I would actually start there before trying to aim for VO2 max. But the fact that if you were at the bottom of the level of 0 to 25, you probably are missing out these basic factors. So I would actually start there. And the fact that you're between 0 to 25 also tells me that you're probably not moving enough and you don't have mobility in your life. So starting slow and starting on the basics, which would be the smart thing to do before you then move on to things like VO2 max. But with anything, I find when it comes to movement and exercise, the hardest part of all of it is to actually just get started. So no matter where you are, if you feel that your health is not where it's supposed to be, I would start with the basics. This wraps up this episode of Peak Performance Hacks. All the links and resources are in the video description or in the resource section, whether it is on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. If you're watching this on YouTube, please consider subscribing. And if you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, please leave us a review so that more people can discover our podcast and it could benefit them as well. Until I catch you next time, speak soon.